This war lasted only 8 weeks, but it was one of the most intense conflicts of the late 20th century. This is the story of the Falkland Islands War. In the early 1980s, Argentina was in a state of economic crisis. By 1982, inflation had reached over 300% and unemployment was around 10%. The military junta that had been ruling the country for several years was desperate to find a way out of the crisis, and they believed that a war might be just what they needed. And the Argentine military believed that by starting a war with Britain over the islands, they could rally the Argentine people around the flag and boost their popularity. On April 2, 1982, Argentine forces invaded the islands. They had 3 main goals. The first was to capture the island's airfield so that they could bring in reinforcements. The second was to capture the island's main city, Port Stanley, and the third was to prevent any British reinforcements from coming to the island. But while all this was happening, there was one very important thing that the Argentine military did not know. A British warship was sailing through the area, and it was heading straight for the Falkland Islands. This was the HMS Hermes, and it carried with it a task force of 6 ships and several thousand troops. The Argentine military had no idea that this was happening, and they didn't realize that they were about to be attacked until it was too late. On April, the British task force arrived at the Falkland Islands. Fighting began immediately, and within hours, the HMS Hermes had sunk to Argentine destroyers. The British quickly gained control of the sea and the skies around the islands, but they soon realized that they were in trouble. You see, the Argentine military had dug in around Port Stanley, and they were able to hold off the British attacks. For several weeks, the British tried everything they could to dislodge the Argentines, but they couldn't. It seemed like the war would turn into a stalemate. Then on May, the British came up with a plan. They would send in a small group of elite soldiers to try to capture Mount Longdon. If they could capture the mountain, then they would have a high ground overlooking Port Stanley. This would allow them to bring artillery to bear on the town, and it would force the Argentines to either surrender or retreat. On May, the British launched their attack. They sent in 2,000 soldiers from the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, along with a few tanks and armored vehicles. The attack was fierce, and within hours, the British had captured Mount Longdon. The British then brought in their artillery, and they began to pound Port Stanley. Within a few days, the Argentines in the city had no choice but to surrender. On June, the fighting ended. Over 1,000 British soldiers and 650 Argentine soldiers had been killed. The war was over, and the United Kingdom had won. But while the war had been a victory for the United Kingdom, it had also been a disaster. The conflict had cost the UK over £700 million, and to make matters worse, the war had damaged relations between the UK and some of its allies. Many people in the UK felt that the United States had not done enough to help them during the war, and this led to a decline in anti-Americanism in the UK. But despite all the bad things that had happened, there was one good thing that came out of the war. In the aftermath of the conflict, the United Kingdom and Argentina began to rebuild their relationship. So what can we learn from the Falkland Islands War? For the UK, the war was a reminder of the importance of being prepared for any eventuality. The UK had been caught off guard by the Argentine invasion, and this almost cost them the war. But because of the quick reactions of the Royal Navy, the war did not end up being a disaster for the UK. For Argentina, the war was a reminder of the dangers of military adventurism. The Argentine military had been in power for several years, and they had used this power to try to solve problems that had nothing to do with national security, and this had nearly cost them their country. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Also check out our other videos, which tell the stories of some of the most amazing conflicts in human history.